I want to talk. Let's move back towards something a little more general. You described going through an inner battle for self-love during this process of growing up. Why didn't you love yourself?
Well, I was diagnosed as learning disabled at the tender, very vulnerable young age of not even 3 years old. And in grade school, with my peers, I stuck out in ways that I would rather have not stuck out. I knew I was different. I knew that I was very, very much in the minority of being in the special education classroom where most of my peers weren't. And that rendered me a sitting duck of sorts, where unfortunately I had to deal with bullying. Fortunately, nothing that seriously injured me or that obviously was enough to cripple permanently my sense of self. Because though it took a while, today I'm proud and confident and strong in myself and living my truth genuinely, unmasked. But during my formative years, it was anything but. And what I had to do, and what countless other autistics unfortunately have to do, particularly in my so-called lost generation of us older autistic adults diagnosed late, is that we needed to mask our genuine selves in order to fit in. And that would be at the heart of why I had this inner battle of working towards self-love, of being comfortable in my own skin, was having been labeled learning disabled at a young age, having various struggles around socialization that made it not impossible, but challenging to make meaningful friendships. And all those things do a number on a young person's self-esteem. And that included at Oberlin. Oberlin was a real challenge because by absolutely no fault of its own, it was a very diversified, very complex environment relative to the sheltered environment in which I grew up. And that's a wonderful thing that I love about Oberlin, but it was a challenge for me as an autistic that with the complexities, with a larger campus, larger classes, louder parties, and often in crowds of people, that can be a very, very challenging scenario for you if you're autistic, that it was hard socially. But I still managed, took time and effort to make a few friends. And for that, I'm grateful. But all those things play into the so-called inner battle that I write about.
Yeah. Well, you
Being different, because society has this awful, awful, I think, habit, society at large, of pathologizing difference in so many forms, whether you're different with respect to uh, sexual orientation, gender identity, whether you're different racially. In my case, if you're different with respect to neurology or neurotype, society tends to pathologize difference in so many of its forms.
yeah.
And that plays into that struggle, because what the greater society thinks of you, how the greater society judges you, inevitably impacts sense of self.
Were you looking as a songwriter? I know you had maybe some dreams or as a musician? You indicate that music became core to your self identity. Was there a sense that music was going to make you famous so that you would be accepted by that larger society, or did you circumvent that grim fate?
I never, I had thoughts in high school that this might be something I would pursue. Um, that craze in my mind didn't last long of I'm going to be a famous musician someday. My mother in particular, I think, helped me to kind of come down to earth. That look, Sam, you can always play music. Whatever money you might make from it is money that you'll make. And I did make a supplemental income doing piano teaching, doing gigs with bands, etc. But I had thoughts of going into music education. After Oberlin, I went to the University of Arizona. I enrolled in a post-baccalaureate teacher certification program that where I earned my degree in music history and theory from Oberlin. This was a program at the U of A that enabled you to get certified to teach in the area in which you majored as an undergraduate. So thinking I would want to be a music teacher, that kind of fell short. So here I was after this 2-year program at the U of A and 4 years of Oberlin, 6 years of higher ed, doing music and music ed, that these were areas I decided just weren't for me.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going through a transitional period in my life of moving from one job to the next. These were dead end jobs. And ultimately, just through sheer luck, found myself working in information technology, which ended up clicking and which I do to this day. 27 years with my current company, and I did a little over a year prior to this job in technology. So that's not quite, but almost 30 years doing IT. So thankfully, I found what clicked. But I never expected to be a strictly performing musician and to be famous and to be able to sustain enough of an income doing just that. I had a fantasy of it. I think all of us do. But thankfully, I came to know better, to bring my expectations around that more down to earth.
Well, not to diminish the importance of music, I'm going to read a quote from your book. I benefited greatly from group music experiences in that everybody in a given ensemble needs to listen to what's going on around them, feel connected to everybody else, and commit to what the group is collectively doing to deliver a solid performance. Now, that's profound. What I'm curious about is why was that possible for you in music, but not necessarily elsewhere?
Um, Music is in my blood. It goes back many generations on my father's side of the family. Um, there are processes in the brain that deal with music that are separate from how you deal with other things. If you're familiar with Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, music is a unique intelligence unto itself, that there were possibilities for me with music that just didn't exist in other aspects of my life, that that I wrote about music, what I did, that you just read, but that it's just different in a non-musical context for me.
Did the music experiences you have model for you so that you were able to transfer those experiences out, or did they remain in music?
I can only assume, Adam, I can only assume that they transferred out because as I grew older, granted, awareness of my surroundings and being in tune with what's going on around me is still a challenge, but considerably less of one in my latter years than during my formative years. That in light of that, I can only assume that group music participation figured into me being able to grow into a more aware person than I was prior.
And in support of that, I have another quote from your book. Expressing myself through songs, as in the ones you wrote, ultimately helped me rein in my feelings, cope with them better than I had previously been able to. It was as if letting my imagination run free and releasing my emotions helped me find greater peace of mind and inner strength. Now, of course, that's going to come in handy.
No doubt, without question. Creativity really can help in very magical, often very profound ways if we're able to be creative and channel that. And there are a lot of, I already mentioned many names. There are lots and lots and lots of people on the autism spectrum who are creative thinkers. Neurodiversity in general, um, some of whom are non autistic, but who have neurotypes that are in the minority. That's kind of what I mean when I say neurodivergent. Um, Learning differences, ADHD are examples. Um, that often will co occur with autism, but with neurodiversity in general, with neurodivergent individuals, uh, creativity is another very common ability associated with our neurotypes. And we're fortunate for that because that can bring color and value to our lives that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah. And that was the case for you.
It was, fortunately, and I'm fortunate for that. I think a lot of that has to do with the long lineage of musicians who came before me, mostly on my father's side of the family, that it pretty much was just in my blood that I was destined to get involved in this. I write in the book that it was my father, of course, who steered me towards music. Uh, my grandfather was able to make a reasonable living doing just music. My father became a doctor, but he still played music as well. My brothers have. My son and my nieces and nephews do. So it's a family thing that it was inevitable that I would be doing this, where my father knew that if I did, it would be something that I'd be good at and that would therefore help in my self esteem building process.
Now, you write that your son is also on the spectrum. Is that correct?
Correct.
And music is something the two of you share together.
That is correct.
Um, well, when you found out, when did you find out that your son was on the spectrum, and what was your reaction?
See, this is a good example. When you're younger, the typical scenario is that you learn a lot sooner than I did. With my son, it was right around 2 years of age, where I waited until 40.
Right.
Now, granted, I knew I was learning disabled just shy of 3, but that's different.
Well, it is different. It's very
It's
different.
different
What would you
because
talk about? Yeah, how is it different? Explain that.
uh, it's different because I think what happens, what you learn about yourself at age 3 versus what you learn about yourself at age 40, inevitably because of age, you're gonna make different things out of those diagnoses. Or as I would actually say, that I was identified as learning disabled, identified as being autistic. That would be more consistent actually with the social model versus the medical model, that distinction that I drew earlier. But I could never, for the longest time, accept my learning disability. I rebelled against it, as I write in the book, because arguably I couldn't really handle very well the fallout from it.
Yeah.
At age 40, you've experienced life more. You have a level of maturity that you don't when you're 3, 4 years old. That with autism, yeah, was a big shock initially. But then it dawned on me, look, learn more about this, figure things out, uh, and work hard to accept the autism. Because if you don't, you'll never truly find happiness. It dawned on me, I better work on this because if I don't, how am I ever going to be truly happy with who I am? So that's what I worked hard to do. And thankfully, that's what I succeeded in doing. I didn't have the intellectual means or the awareness to be able to do that as a young person with a learning disability.
Right.
Um, so I rebelled against it. So, two very different experiences, but they co occur. I'm both learning disabled and autistic. Um, you could also look at it as a learning difference. Again, there are many ways to look at these things: learning difference, learning disability, whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong there. But two different things that co-occur with me. And more often than not, with autistic individuals, there will be co-occurring neurotypes with us. Or if you want to call them diagnoses, fine. Again, depending upon whether you look at things from the medical point of view or the social point of view. Diagnosis versus identification, disorder versus neurotype. But there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not disordered. I'm just different.
Yeah. Now I work with young children a lot, and I'm talking about as young as 3 months old in our business. And I have come to greatly respect what children are able to think about and understand. So I want to make a stretch here and describe your experience and see if it resonates with you. Uh, you're on the spectrum, but you don't know it. So you're likely to have a greater capacity for pattern recognition, for wanting to problem solve. And so you see yourself and you're given an explanation, which is learning disabled, and you're processing that explanation, but perhaps that explanation doesn't satisfy you as a child. It doesn't match what you're seeing. Is that at all accurate?
Absolutely. How is it that I'm learning disabled, but I'm doing very well in school?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
made good grades, good enough to get accepted to Oberlin College, uh, an elite liberal arts school slash music conservatory. Um, there were a lot of things that didn't make sense to me, and words matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a very, very difficult time with the disability label growing up because it made me feel different in ways that I didn't want to be looked at as being different.
Okay, I'm saying even further, perhaps you
But
didn't even feel it was accurate. Not even about perception, but this isn't me.
and so, yeah, um, it didn't make sense, but nonetheless, it's what I was diagnosed with. I knew I was learning disabled, but in knowing it, I didn't really understand very well why I had been labeled it. I had challenges, particularly with reading comprehension in school. Um, as a result of that, English composition was my hardest subject. I steered clear of it at Oberlin. I struggled through it in grade school. I did better with the basics of grammar and syntax and learning those because there was greater structure, greater predictability. These are things that help autistic individuals, is to try to be able to work within a structure. Where with English composition, and particularly with Shakespeare, I couldn't make anything out of Shakespeare. Like, what
Hmm.
are these words? What are they supposed to mean? I was completely lost because understanding and being able to make assumptions and inferences about characters, about character development, those are anything but structured and logical. And I've always worked best in the midst of logic, structure, predictability, straightforwardness, which is why I did very well in math, did well in science. In English class, what saved my grades from really being in the gutter were the grammar tests. Grammar is straightforward, learning that. And later on in life, I would get better with reading comprehension. And ultimately, of course, I would go on to write a book,
Yeah, post or
oddly enough.
after your diagnosis, after you
Yeah,
recognized who you were, you became a writer, which is profound to me.
yeah. So today, the learning disability is more about that I process what's going on around me different than others do. Now, granted, I do see myself as disabled, but the way many of us in the neurodiversity community look at disability, not entirely, but a good portion of it is due to external influences. I don't view my autism as rendering me intrinsically disabled. Rather, I feel, and many of us do, that it's external influences that disable us. For me, historically and to this day, it's been society's expectations around communication, around behavior, around socialization that were not established with me or my neurotype in mind. And that can be a very, very disabling force. But if we're in an environment that's accommodating, with accommodations that can help us to be at our best, then in a way we move from feeling disabled to feeling empowered. External influences from the greater society, from other people, from what's going on externally around us. Now, granted, there are challenges with autism that internally are disabling, but a big part of the disability picture, not the entirety of it, but a good chunk of it, has to do with external forces being disabling to us and accommodations that help us be at our best can help to mitigate that.
Well, this segues into your book somewhat because I'm not sure, perhaps the audience is a dual audience. Perhaps it's people on the spectrum and people who are not on the spectrum who should know more. Is that accurate that there are two audiences for this book?
There could be a couple of them.
Yeah.
The book is kind of a hybrid memoir slash self-help book where I've been very fortunate to have been able to find happiness and success in life in spite of all the challenges and adversities that I've faced. I felt that it would make sense to put self-help content in the book that could help not just neurodivergent individuals, but anybody maybe to carve out better lives for themselves. Because many of the things that I have found challenging, um, anybody could find challenging, whether they're autistic or not. I write about social skills building. I write about rising above bullying. I write about self-esteem building, workplace success, what I've learned about being a good spouse, and about parenting. That applies to everybody. All of those areas apply to everybody. But if the reader doesn't identify with those challenges in themselves, then the book carries value in terms of teaching the reader about what autism can entail from somebody who actually walks in these shoes.
Yeah. Well,
So
but
any number of people could be an audience for the book.
what I really like about the self-help aspect of the book is that, yes, these are things that everyone struggles with, but even things that people don't think they struggle with, you have had to learn most of these things from ground zero, and become good at things that some people take for granted. How to have a
Correct.
conversation, how to get a job, how to make sure you don't irritate someone. And you go into great detail about these things because you've had to learn them. And in that
Correct,
you've had to
Adam.
learn them,
Yes.
um, you understand them at a deeper level than someone who might naturally do them. And, like, okay, so maybe I can have conversations with people, but maybe that natural skill only takes me so far. And you who have had to learn to have conversations can take me somewhere else.
That's absolutely true, Adam. There's a lot of validity to what you just said. Thank you. Um, yeah, you take on a different perspective on things. You're right, when you have to learn them from scratch versus if like most non-autistic individuals, many of the things I had to work hard on would often come naturally to others. Your perspective on challenge and adversity is going to be very different inevitably. And that's where um, it becomes very important in the book and in all the writing that I've done before, during, and after the writing of the book, of sharing my lived experiences. Because in talking about what I've lived through, in talking about what I've learned and what I've experienced, that'll hopefully bring about greater understanding, uh, greater acceptance, and that ultimately would bring down the stigma, because a lot of what revolves around stigma is if you're confronted with something you don't understand. And this is why it's very important that if you're learning about autism, that you learn about it from those of us who are autistic. We have the lived experiences of, of autistic individuals where parents, teachers, clinicians, by absolutely no fault of their own, just inevitably are going to have a very different perspective on autism than we will, by no fault of their own. Um, but our perspective matters because we have the lived experiences to share from which people can learn and gain a better understanding about autism and about neurodiversity.
That's why I would highly recommend your book, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, Small Steps, Challenges, and Triumphs Through an Autistic Lens. Would you tell people how they can find the book and how they can find you to learn more about you?
It's next to my name there, my website, www.samfarmerauthor.com. You can read about the book. You can read about me. And on the media page, there are links to all kinds of published articles, podcasts, videos of author talks, etc. And there's also an events tab of upcoming author talks and also a contact page. So learning about the book, ordering the book, getting on my mailing list, contacting me, um, can all be done at samfarmerauthor.com.
Well, great. Sam, it's really been a pleasure to see you again and to talk to you. And I so
Likewise,
appreciate,
Adam.
thank you. I'm so glad you wrote this book, and I appreciate you talking with me about it.
Thank you very much. This was great. Thank you
Thank,
for having me.
It's our pleasure. And we also want to thank you, audience, for joining us on this trip. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. There's lots of others on the channel. Please check them out. As usual, like, subscribe, and if there's somebody you want to see on this channel, let me know. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.